Okay, hello and welcome to today's lecture. Today we are going to be talking talking some more about memory management. So as such, in the last lecture we started this new chapter. So the next two chapters are all about how the operating system manages memory. Okay, so given that today we will cover chapter number 8, lecture number 2. Okay, so this is chapter number 8, lecture number 2. So today we'll talk about logical and physical addresses. We'll talk about process relocation, which means that if you need to swap out a process and bring it back in, where do you store it in memory? In the same place that it was, or some other place, right? And also, generally your processes are on the disk, and then from the disk you have to bring them into memory. So do you bring them in the same location that they were in the disk when you're bringing them into memory, or can the locations change? Okay, and then we'll also look at swapping and then some other memory management concepts. Okay, so now we will get started with chapter number 8 and lecture number 2. Okay, now I am on slide 2, and the title of this is Early Times, No Memory Abstraction. Okay, so when we go back to the early days of memory management, the one thing you observed was in those times there was no memory abstraction, which means that every program saw the physical address directly. Okay, so for example, here's an instruction: move register 1000. So what does this instruction do? This instruction moves the contents of physical memory location 1000. So we know that we have a bunch of memory locations in the physical memory in our RAM, and each location stores a certain amount of data. So we can assume each location stores probably 1 byte. Okay, we can assume that. So to store 4 bytes, you would need access to 4 locations. So anyway, go to physical memory location 1000, pick up whatever is in there, right, and then copy that to register 1, and then probably perform some operation on it, run some other instructions. So main thing we observe here is it is possible for user programs. So this instruction is a part of a user program. It's possible for user programs to directly access the physical memory. Okay, so physical memory is our RAM. So depending on how much RAM we have, we can divide it into a bunch of memory locations. Each memory location storing 1 byte of data. So main thing over here is the users have direct access to physical memory. Okay, which means they can specify the memory locations in their instructions, and they have direct access to those locations. So as such, you can see there is no abstraction. Physical memory is not abstracted from the users. In fact, the users can directly access the physical memory. Again, this is a very simple scheme, but what is the issue here? The issue is security. This is not a very secure scheme, because since the users can directly access the physical memory, they can probably do wrong things with it. Okay, for example, trying to put some incorrect value, right, or trying to access some location which they should not be accessing, right? So let's say the operating system kernel is living in certain memory locations, and now when you have direct access, then you can potentially try to access those locations and try to write something there, which is of course illegal and should not be allowed. So what people discovered was giving users direct access to physical memory is not a good idea. Okay, So they thought that we do need some abstraction of physical memory. Okay, we do need to provide some abstraction so that you have this abstraction layer between the users and physical memory, which means the users should not be able to directly access the physical memory. So this led to the concept of logical addresses and physical addresses. Okay, logical addresses and physical addresses. Okay, so generally you have these physical addresses. They refer to the hardware addresses of the physical memory. So you will have a physical memory, you will have a RAM, and then within that whichever addresses you have, each of those are called physical addresses. Okay. On the other side you have virtual address, which are actually viewed by the process which the CPU generates. What happens eventually is each virtual address is mapped to a physical address. So when your process needs to execute, right, or let's say it's living in the disk, some process needs to execute. So within your disk, or we can also call that disk as virtual memory. Within your virtual memory, you have a set of locations. So you go to location 1 for that particular process. You go to location 1 in its virtual address space, and then some address is generated, and you may have to bring some data or instruction into the physical memory. So eventually that virtual address for that process is going to be mapped to a physical address. Okay, and not only that, every time you try to access any virtual address for that process, so why will you access the virtual address? To run some instruction to grab some data. So every time you access or generate a virtual address in that process's virtual address space, there has to be a mapping to a physical address. So you'll have a set of mappings. Each mapping will be from a particular virtual address to a particular physical address, and this mapping will not be done by the user. This will be done by the memory management unit. So then you can have the OS has more control, and when the user is generating a virtual address, the OS gets to decide which physical address it is going to be mapped to. So it gives the OS, it actually gives the OS control over physical memory and not the user. Okay, so there can be many advantages of this mapping. So we'll see throughout this chapter. Okay. So now I am on slide 3. So now we have discussed that there are two kinds of addresses that we are going to be dealing with, logical and physical. So the logical is also called virtual, and physical is the real address. Okay. So a process will have an address space allocated to it, let's say 1500 and 2500. This is a nice contiguous block of memory. So let us call this as logical virtual address space. This is the space that the process can use. So let's say for example, to motivate the discussion, within your disk you are this particular process has an address space allocated to it. Range is 1500 to 2500. So that is the address space within the disk which has been allotted to this process. In other words, this is the virtual address space of this process. Range of addresses which sort of belong to the process, in which it can store instructions and data and everything. Okay. So this is the logical or virtual address space. This is the space that the process can use. But in order to run, when you want to, so the eventual goal is to run the process, right? The eventual goal is to run the process, and when you want to run a process, then each of those virtual addresses have to be mapped to a physical address. Physical memory is also, we also call that as RAM, main memory. So each and every one of those virtual or logical addresses need to be mapped to corresponding physical addresses. Okay, so it becomes necessary for the OS to map this logical address space, right, which contains of a set of addresses to a corresponding physical address space, again physical set of addresses. And note that the mapping does not necessarily have to be direct. So if you are mapping a 1500 virtual address, it does not necessarily have to be mapped to 1500 physical address. It can be mapped to any other address. Okay, so you have some amount of flexibility, because what may happen is this range of addresses 1500 to 2500 you have in the virtual address space. Now these same addresses may be assigned to some other process 1500 to 2500 in the physical address space. So that means you will need to pick some other physical memory locations. So this way you have the flexibility. The mapping does not have to be exact, which means 1500 to 2500 does not have to be mapped to let me just rephrase, 1500 to 2500 in the virtual address space does not have to be mapped to 1500 to 2500 in the physical address space. It may be mapped to 2500 to 3500 or whatever. Okay. So this mapping, address mapping, is done by a device, hardware device called MMU, Memory Management Unit. It is done at runtime. So as you generate a physical address, as you generate a virtual address, at runtime it is mapped to a physical address. Okay. And how this mapping is done is what this chapter is all about. Okay. So generally what will happen is, once again, how the process will work. Let's say you have a process and its virtual address space is 1500 to 2500. Right, so 1000 locations, 1000 memory locations if we have roughly, and then one location we have 1 byte. So then what we are saying is 1000 bytes, or roughly 1 KB, 1 kilobyte. That is the size of this process. So now when you want to run this process, let's say you want to go to 1500 virtual address and then grab whatever is in there to run it. So perhaps it contains some starting instruction, right? So now what you will do is go to the generate this address 1500 virtual address, and now to actually run it, this has to be mapped to a physical address. Okay. So what the memory management unit might do is, okay, it sees which one is available and says, okay, fine, 1800 is available in the physical address. So then you have a mapping, 1500 virtual address maps to 1800 physical address. Okay. So once again I repeat, 1500 virtual address in the disk maps to 1800 physical address in the RAM. So now what you do is, you have a disk operation. You bring the contents from 1500 virtual address to 1800 physical address, and now you can execute. And then next you generate 1501, and then you try to figure out a physical address for that. So let's say 1801. So then you bring the contents of 1501 virtual into 1501 virtual into 1801 physical, right? And once you've brought that instruction or data in to the physical address, now you can do your execution. Because remember, instructions and data have to be brought into main memory before execution can happen. So this is what we're doing, bringing instructions and data from virtual address to the physical address so that they can be executed. So how exactly do we do this mapping is what this chapter is all about. We'll look at different strategies. Okay. So once again, logical virtual address generated by the CPU. You can look at it as let's say address in the disk, right? So all of disk can be regarded as a virtual address space. And then you have physical addresses seen by the memory unit. These are the actual hardware addresses of the physical memory. So one way to simplify this is, you can look at virtual address as an address of a disk, and you can look at physical address as the address of the main memory. Both are kinds of memories, both disk and main memory, and they both have addresses. The actual difference is in the size. The size of the disk is much larger than the size of the physical memory. Okay, hope it's clear. Okay, now I am on slide number 4, and here we are talking about process relocation. So in the next slide we'll talk about or we'll discuss a concept called swapping. So what happens here is that a process which is inside of main memory is transferred back to the disk. So generally we know that whenever a process executes, it has to be brought into the main memory, right? And so what we're doing here in swapping is while a process is within the main memory, what we are saying is we need to shift this process back to the disk. Okay. So why would we need to do this swapping? Well, we may find ourselves in a situation in which we have a lot of memory pressure. So what do we mean by having a lot of memory pressure? What we mean is we have already overcommitted our main memory, and which means the main memory is already overloaded, and now suddenly a process with a very high priority value comes in. Let's say a real-time process, right? So we're running a bunch of non-real-time processes, and then memory is overcommitted. We don't have any more main memory, and now because the arrival of processes is dynamic, we can't say which process will arrive in the future and how long or how short it will be. So now we have in our system freshly arrived real-time process. So now clearly we don't have enough memory to accommodate this, and we can't ask this process to wait, otherwise it may miss its deadline. So then what we do is we pick a process which is in the main memory, and then what we do is we evict that process, copy it back to disk. So maybe one or two processes we swap out from the main memory back to disk, and then we run the real-time process, and then later on when sufficient main memory is available, perhaps after the execution of this real-time process, we may bring the original processes back in from disk to main memory. Okay. Now the question is, we may have to the issue of process relocation comes in. So once you swap a process from main memory to disk, right, and then when you're bringing it back in at some point in the future, do you want would you bring that process into the same block of main memory that you had brought it in the first time? So let's say you have a virtual address space of 1000 to 2000, for example, virtual address space of 1000 to 2000, and let's say you bring it into main memory into 3000 to 4000. Okay, so which means 1000 to 2000 in virtual memory corresponds to, let's say, 3000 to 4000 in physical memory. So you have the mapping of those set of addresses. Now you swap it out from 3000 to 4000 because a new process has come in, which is let's say real time. And eventually when you want to bring in this process later on, the question is whether you bring it back into the same physical address space 3000 to 4000, or can you bring it back to some other address space. So if you think about it, clearly it's more flexible if you can bring it to or can swap the process back into any available address space, not just 3000 to 4000. So this is a lot more flexible because the 3000 to 4000 may already have been taken by some other process. So you want something more flexible, which means you need to relocate processes to different memory regions from time to time. Initially you brought in the process to 3000 to 4000, and then second time you brought in, maybe you brought it into, you relocated to a different region, maybe 8000 to 9000. So this is what we mean by process relocation. Okay. So now I am on slide 5. We are talking about swapping now, right? So the question is physical memory large enough to store all the processes? Which means you are running a set of processes. You look at the memory image of each process, how much memory it needs, If you add all of them up, will the main memory or will the physical memory be sufficient to accommodate all of them? Definitely not. In fact, if you look at it, there is a great difference in sizes of main memory and that of disk. Main memory could be about 4 gigabytes, whereas disk could be about 1 terabyte. Right, so which means in the worst case you have 1 terabyte of applications, and now can the physical memory accommodate all of them? Of course not. Physical memory is only 4 gigabyte, small fraction of 1 terabyte. Okay, so we may have 550 to 100 processes even before a user process starts. So you can go to your activity monitor if you have a Mac machine. If you have a Windows machine, you can go to Task Manager, and likewise I think you have a system monitor in Linux if I'm not wrong, right? System monitor. So using these software you can get a peek into which processes are running on your system, and you'll see that even before you start the execution of a user process, you may already see a large number of processes already running. Most of them will be kernel processes. For example, a process for Wi-Fi, a process for software updates, a process for, if you have a phone, a process for Google Assistant, right? So bunch of processes would already be running even before the first user process is started. Process that checks apps for updates, checks for email, and so on. So clearly the main memory is not sufficient to hold all the processes or even a large chunk of the processes at once. So main memory can become overloaded. So question is, how, with the limited amount of main memory you have, how do you want to support all these processes? Because to run any process you have to bring it to main memory. There is no other option. So one solution how you can support a limited main memory, how it can support a large number of processes is bring each process in its entirety, the whole process, bring it in from disk to main memory, run it for a while, and then put it back on disk to make way for another process. So bring a whole process in from disk to main memory, run it, and then swap it back from main memory to disk, bring in another process. Okay. So at any time you're only executing a small number of processes, but by doing this switching you can ensure that a large number of processes can perhaps make progress. So this is called this process is called swapping. So here again a key question is, which process do you want to swap out from main memory to disk, and which process do you want to swap in from disk to main memory? So this is a key question which we'll attempt to answer. Another solution that you can use to ensure that a limited amount of main memory can support a large number of applications is virtual memory. So we'll talk about virtual memory in the next chapter. We'll leave that for now. So what we have is, we have a set of processes in a ready queue. Who will pick the scheduling order? Of course the scheduling algorithm. So say scheduler picks process P. Now if P is not in memory, and if there is no memory region big enough, then we swap out a current process from memory to disk and swap in the scheduled process. So let's say you have a ready queue and the process next picks P. Now if P is in the main memory, fine, it can execute. But what happens when P is not in the main memory? Which means it's on disk. So then you have to bring it into main memory. If you are able to find the sufficient amount of main memory to bring that process P in, you do that. But you may have a scenario in which your main memory is overloaded and you don't have a memory block which is large enough to hold P. So then what you do is you resort to swapping. You take one or maybe even more than one process, swap them from main memory to disk, and now you have a sufficient size memory hole, and then bring process P in. So this is one scenario in which you can have swapping between main memory and disk. So now I am on slide 6. So this is a schematic view in the form of a diagram of swapping. So we have our main memory, and one block the operating system kernel is running, and the rest of it is user space. So all this main memory is our physical address space. So the amount used by the user is colored as gray. So what we're doing first is we're swapping out a process P1 from main memory back to disk. So this backing store is just another name for a disk. So we are swapping out P1 and swapping in P2. So perhaps now P2 needs to be scheduled, needs to be executed, needs to be run. So it has to be brought into main memory. And let's say if the main memory does not have a sufficient amount available to bring in process P2, then we swap out process P1. Perhaps it was a lower priority process. So we swap out process P1 and bring in process P2. So all we're doing over here is for P1, it is residing in the main memory. It has its image there, a range of addresses. So we're just copying that whole range of addresses to the disk. Okay. Again, we don't have to copy to the same address, but generally the backing store or disk is much larger than the main memory. So we can copy to any range of addresses in the backing store that we want. And likewise, now that we have a memory hole available, we can bring process P2 in from the disk to user space. So again, copying from disk to main memory. Again, we are mapping it, right? For P2, each virtual address is mapped to a physical address, and both do not have to be the same. So note how we are doing address mapping here. When we're swapping out, we're mapping physical address space of P1 to virtual address space of P1. When we're swapping in, we're mapping virtual address space of P2 into physical address space. Okay. So in this way, we can perform swapping. So we discussed why swapping needs to be done. So because main memory is sort of it's a piece of hardware which is not available in large quantities, right? So main memory is a precious resource. It can only accommodate a limited number of programs. So when the memory pressure is high, when a lot of programs need to run, so for example on your desktop or laptop, you click 20 programs at once. So generally that will definitely create memory pressure. All of them need the main memory to execute. So you may have a scenario in which a process has to be swapped out and a process has to be swapped in. So we know what swapping is, we know why it's needed, and now we discuss the cost of swapping. So what we're saying is there is a performance concern in performing this swapping, because we're doing disk I/O, and disk I/O generally is expensive. It takes a long time. So time to access disk is much larger than time to access main memory. So it makes sense, because main memory is expensive, its access times are low and it is available in a small amount. Disk is cheap, its access times are high and it's available in a large amount. So what we're saying is the context switch time can be high. So where does context switch come here? When you're swapping. So you have a context switch. You have a context switch between process P1 and P2. You swap out P1, you bring in P2. All part of the context switch. So consider, as an example, consider a 100 MB process, 100 MB swapping to hard disk. And for each of the disks that we use, there is a disk transfer rate. So you can go to any hard disk manufacturer, Western Digital, Seagate, and when you check out the specifications of that hard disk, one metric you will observe is transfer rate, disk transfer rate. So in this case, we take this as 50 MB per second. So 100 MB process, transfer rate is 50 MB per second between disk and main memory. So transfer or swap to or from main memory takes 100 by 50, 2 seconds. Transfer rate between whether you're going from disk to memory or whether you're going from memory to disk is same 50 Mbps. Okay. Disk IOs are involved in both cases. So if the process size is 100 MB, so how much time does it take for the swap transfer? 2 seconds. So what is the total swap time? 4 seconds. 2 seconds for the swap in, 2 seconds for the swap out. Right? So you swap it in from disk to main memory, takes 2 seconds, and eventually you may have to swap it out from main memory to disk, and then if you add both, 4 seconds. Okay. So all in all, quite a expensive operation. Anything in seconds range is expensive. Of course, transfer time is proportional to amount of memory swapped. Here we are 100 MB. You can, if you have more memory, then obviously time will be more as well. Swapping time will be more. So to again motivate this, let's look at an example. So let's say we have 4 GB of main memory, realistic, and out of that 4 GB, 1 GB is taken up by the operating system. So amount of memory available for user processes is 4 minus 1, 3 GB. Okay. So 1 GB the kernel takes up, because kernel again has kernel processes, they also need memory. So let's say it takes up 1 GB. It's reserved. So the amount of main memory we have for users is, user programs is 4 minus 1, 3 GB. Okay. So now if we have now let's say two sample calculations. 175 MB process can be swapped in how many seconds? 175 MB in 3.5 seconds at a transfer rate of 50 Mbps, megabytes per second. So transfer rate is 50 megabytes per second, and process is 175 megabytes. So swap out, just a swap out is 175 by 50, 3.5 seconds. A 3 GB process will take how many seconds? So 3 GB, if we say go by the calculation, is 3000 MB by 50, 60 seconds. So naturally, larger is the process, more will be the swap in and swap out time. Now that is quite easy to see. So as such, because of two factors, because of the large size of the process which has to be swapped, and because of the disk transfer rates which are generally slow, swapping can have significant overhead, which is now, it becomes a part of the context switch. Because what you're doing is swapping out P1, bringing in P2. So this is part of the context switch. Okay. I hope it's clear, right? Okay, so now I am on slide 8, and now we look at a scheme that implements address relocation. So in the previous slides we have discussed address relocation. So what is this address relocation, and why do we need to perform address relocation? Right. So here what we are saying is, if we have a sort of a virtual address space which has a range between x and y, and so x is the first address, y is the last address in the virtual address space, then we do know this address space has to be mapped to the physical address space. And with the address relocation, what we are saying is, we are not restricted to map this x comma y in virtual to x comma y in physical, right? Which means this x comma y in virtual can be mapped to a comma b in physical, where a is not equal to x and b is not equal to y. Which means we can we can do address relocation. So which means virtual address 0 can be mapped to physical address 1000, right? So in other words, virtual address 0 does not necessarily have to be mapped to physical address 0. Because see, then if we do that, then the user will know that my virtual address is the same as my physical address. And we don't want the users to know what the actual physical addresses are. We only want the OS to know in order to make it more secure. So therefore, when we do the mapping, we have to ensure that the mapping is not direct. So 0 in virtual does not map to 0 in physical. And we also just discussed swapping, in which when we swap out a process from main memory. So within the main memory, it may have been in a certain block, let's say 1000 to 2000. And later on, after a while, when we swap this process back in to resume execution, then we don't have to again go to 1000 to 2000 in the main memory. We can go to any block of memory that is available. So because of these scenarios, we do need to perform address relocation. Okay, so relocating to a different address. Okay. So this process is called dynamic relocation of addresses. It happens dynamically. Whenever we're generating a virtual, dynamically we copy, map it to a physical address. So how do we implement this? Let's discuss a simple relocation scheme based on the concept of a basic base register. So here we can have a variation of the base register called a relocation register. And the idea here is, so we have a relocation register. The idea is that the value in the relocation register is added to every virtual address. So for example, if the base is at 14,000, then an attempt by the user to address virtual location 0 is dynamically relocated to 14,000. Okay. Similarly, an attempt to access 346 is mapped to 14,346. Okay. So which means initially, it may have been in a location 0 to X, and now after the relocation it's at 14,000, right, to 14,000 plus X. So to every address we add the relocation value. Okay. So initially, if it was in main memory, it might have been at in the range of x to y, x comma y, and now the new range is x plus the relocation register value, comma y plus relocation register value. And we can use similar logic with virtual to physical address mapping. So 0 comma max virtual address can map to physical address r plus 0, r plus max. So 0 comma max is the virtual address space for a particular process, and the corresponding physical address space is r plus 0 comma r plus max. So let's say 0 to 100 or 0 to 99 will be mapped to what? If the relocation register contains 14,000, so 0 comma 99 will be mapped to 14,000 comma 14,000 plus 99. Okay, so everybody's clear? So here we see the dynamic relocation. So CPU generates a logical or virtual address 346, and then the memory management unit has taken a call that the relocation will be at 14,000 onwards. Okay, so which means virtual address 0 maps to physical address 14,000, and as it shows in this slide, virtual address 346 maps to physical address 14,346. So here we have this mapping, this relocation. So whenever you want to address or access virtual address 346 to run something, we add it to the relocation register, and then we get our physical address 14,346. So which means the contents of 346 virtual address have to be brought into 14346 physical address, and then it runs. Okay, this way we can do dynamic relocation. So here we are looking at logical to physical. Right. We may even use this relocation in terms of swapping. So if we are swapping initially when a process was within main memory, if it was in particular block of addresses, let's say 0 to 100, and now when we swap it back in, let's say we relocated by 10,000. So now instead of 0 to 99, let's say, where it was initially in the physical space, now it will be 10,000 plus 02 comma 10,000 plus 99. So when you swap it back in, you can when you swap a process back in later on, sometime after you swapped it out, then you don't have to bring it into the same physical memory locations. You can bring that process into different locations. So there again you can use a location register. Okay, now I am on slide number 10, and now we start our discussion on memory allocation strategies. Okay. So now we have clearly defined that in order to execute, a process needs to be brought into main memory, and now we know about virtual addresses and physical addresses. So our virtual memory or our disk constitutes our virtual address space, and each of those virtual addresses need to be mapped to corresponding physical addresses, right, which is done by the operating system. Now we discussed the first technique for allocating memory. Okay. So what we note is the main memory must accommodate both the operating system and the various user processes. So we saw that whenever we see a snapshot of main memory, we see a chunk which is reserved by the OS, by the kernel, and then another chunk which is the reserved for the user processes. So the kernel chunk is called the kernel address space, kernel physical address space, and the user chunk is called the user physical address space. Okay. So clearly we need to allocate main memory in the most efficient way possible, since main memory is a precious resource. It's not available in abundance, so we have to allocate it as efficiently as possible. Okay. We have to have intelligent algorithms, because here we have a resource which is quite precious, which is not available in abundance, and which every program requires. So we need to have some intelligent algorithms for memory allocation. Okay. So one of the first earliest proposed methods was contiguous memory allocation. Okay. As the name suggests, what do we mean by contiguous? So contiguous means sharing a common border, right? Touching, right? Next or together in a sequence. So the Southern Ocean is contiguous with the Atlantic. So here what we have is the main philosophy behind this contiguous memory location is each process is contained in a single contiguous section of memory. So which means if a process has a requirement for memory, then one chunk, one block of main memory is allocated to that process. So each and every process that needs to be executed is allocated physical memory as one and only one chunk. Okay. So which means you can't have a scenario in which for a particular process Px, you have one chunk which is running from 100 to 200, another running from 400 to 600, third running from 1000 to 1100, fourth running from 16 to 1700. That is not allowed. You have to have one chunk. So let's say 500 to 1000. So this is contiguous memory location. Each process is allotted a single section of physical memory. Okay. So generally, we do note that the OS is usually held in lower memory locations. User processes are held in higher memory. So in the contiguous memory location, for each process, only one block of main memory is allocated. Once it's allocated, the process is brought in to that block of memory and then it can execute. Okay. So now I am on slide 11. We're talking about contiguous memory allocation. So each process receives one and only one chunk of main memory. So one of the simplest methods for allocating memory to processes is to divide memory into several fixed size partitions. So you have a block of memory, main memory. You divide it into parts or chunks, and the key thing over here is each part. All the parts or chunks of main memory are of same size, fixed size. So this was used by IBM OS 360 in the 1960s. And it's contiguous memory allocation, so each partition may contain only one process. When a partition is free, a process is selected from the ready queue, loaded into that free partition. So all physical memory partitions are of the same size. So it looks like it's simple to implement because the size is same. But is there any disadvantage to this approach? Well, one disadvantage is in terms of memory utilization, because processes comes in all shapes, all kinds of shapes and sizes. You may have a process which checks for incoming email, a process that generates an alarm, a web browser process, a video game process. So each of these definitely vary in their size and shape. Okay. So because of this, using fixed partitions may not be a good idea. Okay. So because what is the size going to be? Because you have only one size. So if your size is very small, partition size is small, then large processes will not be able to fit in. If your partition size is large, then for small processes the utilization of main memory for that particular partition in which you have the small process will be extremely low. Because note here, all the partitions need to have the same size. So the challenge is what size do you pick? So then what people thought was a better version would have partitions which can be of variable sizes. Okay. So you may have a partition of 1K available, a partition of 10K, a partition of 512K, so on. So variable size partitions. So what you do is you keep a data structure, a table indicating which parts of memory are available and which are occupied. Initially all memory is available for user processes, and one large block of available memory or a hole. Eventually, after many allocations and deallocations, memory contains a set of holes, and set of processes of various sizes. So initially, what we have is whole memory is available, right? So you have one large hole, memory hole for your physical memory, and then as you keep on allocating processes to that, the look of that memory changes, and eventually you have a set of holes into which you can accommodate future processes, and a set of memory blocks which have been occupied by processes that are running. So that this naturally leads to your variable size partitions. Okay. So now I am on slide 12. So what we say here is at a given time we have a list of available block sizes and an input queue of ready processes. So we have two inputs to our algorithm. One is a set of available block sizes. So some of the blocks will be occupied because they have been allocated to processes, and processes are already running, and some set of blocks will be free available. So you have those at one end, list of available block sizes, and at the other end you have input queue of ready processes, or ready queue as we say. So now the OS can order the input queue according to a scheduling algorithm. Let's say shortest job first. right? And then whichever one is at the head of the queue, you find an appropriate memory block for it. So memory holes are allocated to processes based on some algorithm until finally the memory requirements of the next process cannot be satisfied. There is no hole large enough to hold the process. So how well your memory allocations go depend on the size of the memory and the how many processes you have. If your size of memory is limited, and if you have a lot of processes that need to run, eventually you'll see that you have memory pressure, and then you have overcommitted your memory. So we're talking about main memory here. So which means now you may have some holes available, limited number, but they are not large enough to accommodate any of the processes that need to run. So overcommitting of memory. So in that case, what you can do is probably swap out a process, or the OS can wait till a large enough hole becomes available, right? Or it can skip down the ready queue to see if some other smaller processes can fit in. So as such, this is a dynamic storage allocation problem, similar to bin packing. So how to satisfy a request of size n from a list of free holes? So on the one hand, you have a set of memory holes available. On the other hand, you have a set of processes which need to run. And now the problem is each process that needs to be run has to be allocated to a suitable memory hole or block. So how is this allocation done? Allocation of processes that need to run to allocation of those processes to the suitable memory blocks, memory holes. How we do this allocation? There are several algorithms available, simple ones which we will discuss now. Okay. So now I am on slide 13, still discussing contiguous memory allocation, CMA. And here we see a picture. So if you're looking at it from left to right, if you look at the first picture on the left, what can we say about the memory allocation? Do we have memory pressure? Have we overcommitted memory? Yeah, definitely, because not even one byte worth of memory is available. Not even one memory location is available for allocation. So if the OS in its own address space, physical memory, and then we have allocated three processes, 5, 8 and 2, and now we have absolutely full utilization, and we cannot accommodate even one byte of process. So eventually what we do is either process 8 runs to completion, we wait a while, or we swap out process 8, and as a result of either of those two actions, now this hole is created, and then we can fill this hole with process 9, process 10. So we can swap out a large process, and we can allocate many small processes to that, or we can wait till that large process finishes execution. So you can see it's a dynamic scenario. As time moves on, the memory map, so to speak, changes. Okay, memory map will consist of set of available holes, memory holes, and set of available allocations. The OS allocation is always there; it can never be relinquished. Okay. So what we say is multiple partition allocation, many partitions which need to be allocated, memory partitions. So degree of multiprogramming obviously limited by number of partitions. Right. So if you like in the first case, if you have overcommitted memory, you don't have any partition, you can do more multiprogramming. You can't, because to do more multiprogramming you have to bring in more processes into main memory, and you don't have any place to put them. Okay. So we have hole, which is a block of available memory. Holes of various sizes are scattered throughout the memory. Right, here we have one hole, but we can have non-contiguous holes also. So OS, then process 5, then a memory hole, then process 9, then a memory hole, then process 2, then a memory hole. They can be in any kind of sequence. So when a process arrives, it is allocated memory from a hole large enough to accommodate it. So let's say process size is 30 bytes, and the next hole available is 32. fine, you can allocate. Utilization is still quite good. Process exiting frees its partition, and then now that partition can be used to support other processes. Adjacent free partitions can be combined, they can be coalesced together to create a large partition. Okay. This we can also say is defragmenting. Okay. So at the operating system level, what does it need to maintain? The OS needs to maintain information about allocated partitions. So which means process 5 has been allocated this partition, right, starting from here, ending here. Process 2 allocated this partition, starting here, ending here. So the allocations, and then finally, the list of free partitions has to be maintained by the operating system.